Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait for a minute or two just to see if there's anyone else joining, and then we'll start the presentation. For you who are here already, we want this to be an interactive presentation, so the more questions the better. The more questions you have, the more we can get out of this. So just feel free to say hi in the chat. I see my son's joined. Very good. So if you want to be interesting, if you post where you're coming from, if you want to mention your company name, that's fine, or just where you are in the world. I'm assuming most of you are going to be from the UK. Hi, Neil. So yeah, I think we'll get going. So what we're talking about today is the big IT mistake that fast-growing companies should never make. And this is from 18 years of experience and working with lots of different companies. And some of these mistakes we've made ourselves, so we've learned the hard way. But it's better that we learn it so that our clients don't have to learn it the hard way as well. And we'll share these with you. Again, if you have any questions on any of the slides, please feel free. I'm happy to answer those as we go. So let's get started. So I'm from Dr. Logic. I'm the managing director, I'm the founder. I started the company 18 years ago. I used to be a programmer, and after 2 years of paying my rent on a credit card and going into debt, I finally decided that I needed to make some money. So having had a passion for Macs since the mid-80s, I decided that I would help other people, and started out first with home users and then gradually worked with small companies, and then those companies got bigger, started hiring people. So 18 years later, we've got over 30 clients we're supporting. We've got a team of 29 people, and the teams vary anything up to, the companies we work with are anything up to over 1,000 people. So we're dealing with some quite complex issues. So, as I said before, just a reminder, if you're just starting now, please pop any questions into the chat. I've got my assistants, Jeanette and Jenny, just on the side, looking out for anything in case I miss it. But please feel free to ask any questions, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well as we go. If I don't happen to get back to you, I'll make sure that I do reply in the next couple of weeks. So, as I said before, I'm the MD of Dr. Logic. We're a team of 29 people. We're supporting over 30 businesses. Those businesses are anything from startups at about 5 people all the way through to larger companies of over 1,000 people. We work in lots of different sectors. So we work in finance, FMCG, artist management, architects, design agencies, lots of different companies, all with different types of problems, all at different stages of business as well. Vaughan, you're fine. You haven't missed very much. We're just doing the intro. So, so this afternoon what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking to you about how to approach your IT, how to plan it, whatever stage of business you're in. And this applies to any kind of business, no matter how fast you're growing, what kind of ambitions you have. The principles are going to be the same. So I'll be talking about how you avoid these problems, how to plan your IT for growth, and then also to make sure that you're not making costly mistakes. And so hopefully some of this will be relevant. I'll be pointing out different scenarios, and it'd be really useful to know if these apply to you, if you can see yourself in any of these scenarios. And again, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Also, we do have a pocket guide to introducing Macs into a PC business. We're a Mac-focused IT company, and we work with companies that are fully Mac, and also Mac departments within larger PC estates. So it's got some really good tips in there. So if you just email hello@drlogic.com, then we can send you a copy of that. So, what is this big IT mistake that we've used to draw everyone in today? It is really about making sure that you have the right IT in place at the right time. Not too early, not too late, not too large, not too small, but just right, kind of Goldilocks approach. So, and this is an example of what can happen when you haven't planned your IT right. You can end up, and especially when you're starting, you can end up with a cobbled together setup. You might use the computers you have to hand. You might just ask a friend of yours what you might use for email and file sharing. And as you grow and as your needs increase, you might just organically add products and services together until you've got a bit of a spaghetti setup, or as we like to call it, Frankentech. I don't know if anyone has anything like that, any experience like that, maybe when they started. But it's often what we see to some extent when we're working with clients, unless, of course, they've already been following a decent IT strategy. So these are the different scenarios, and these are the different ways that the mistakes can show if you haven't been planning your IT. So in the first case, if I just explain the bar graph a bit so it's clear, we've got time across the bottom, and we've got your business need across the top, and that diagonal line represents your business needs. So as time goes, your needs increase. Now, this is very simplistic. Your needs ebb and flow. Different parts of the business have different kinds of needs, but essentially over time, needs are usually going to get larger and more complex. So in the first situation, what happens is that until you've put your initial IT solution in place, the red area under the graph is the pain that you'd experience by not having IT that's right for you. At the beginning, when you're maybe a couple of people, it's not going to be a big issue. But over time, as you hire people, as you create more departments, as people who were wearing lots of hats at the same time are now wearing less hats, you've got more people doing more focused roles, it gets more painful. So in the first scenario, what's happening is that the blue bars, which are the IT solutions, are coming in and solving a problem. But over time, as your needs grow, your needs are outgrowing your solutions, and you're in the same kind of position that you were in before. And this will repeat. So this is too little. You've put a solution in place, but it only covers you for a certain amount of time. Now, the kinds of issues you're going to face there are, firstly, something called shadow IT. And what that means is that people are finding solutions to their IT problems themselves. They may find that the systems that are in place, or if there are no systems in place at all, are not adequate to manage their work. They're going to find other solutions to do that. This usually shows up in the first place in terms of lots of different spreadsheets. So if you find that you've got lots of spreadsheets that you're using, that's an indication that you may be in this situation. The other thing is, because there are lots of different systems and no one knows exactly what everyone's using, it's a lot harder to manage. If it's a lot harder to manage, then it's going to be less secure. If you can't manage it, you can't secure it. The other thing as well is that when you're onboarding new employees, it's going to be harder for them to get onto the systems that they're supposed to be using because it's not clear what those systems are. And then because people are signing up with different systems or setting them up, they're not, having been planned, they're not going to be connected well either. So you're going to have a lot of copying and pasting and manually entering data. The other situation is where you leave it too late and you work in this kind of Frankentech style for a lot longer. The problems there is that this Frankentech will have become a lot bigger, a lot more sprawling, and it will exacerbate the problems, and you will have a lot of doubling up. You'll be paying for the same types of services across different products. Because it's not so joined up, the productivity is going to be affected. It's also going to be harder for staff to use. The morale is going to go down, and you'll find that people are leaving more often. And also, when you get to the point where you are putting a solution together, it's going to be a much bigger project that you have to undertake, which means it's going to take longer, it's going to use up lots of internal resources to get going, and even when you've invested into the solution, it may not be right because it's going to be the first time you've attempted it. So there's a higher risk. Just checking. As I said, if you want to ask any questions, feel free. I don't know if anyone can see themselves in this or if they've experienced this where, you know, there's been too little, too late, they've found it hard to manage. But these are the issues that often crop up. The other scenario, in fact, is the opposite. You're now putting a system in place early on that's actually much bigger than you need. So this is too early. You're going to spend a lot more money than you need to. It's going to use up a lot of resources, and you really don't have that time when you're a smaller company to dedicate to that kind of work. And it's going to take quite a long time to implement anyway. And at that stage, the business is changing quite a lot, and you may find that what you've put in place isn't going to be right anyway. Okay, Vaughan. So the question is, as an Apple Mac support provider, when is the best time to start getting an MDM solution into the business? So in case you don't know what an MDM solution is, that's just device management, which means that you can configure a computer, you can install software, you can upgrade operating systems and applications and set other settings such as desktop backgrounds and sleep times and so on. There really is, it's good to have that right from the get-go. There's little cost, it's very easy to set up, and it also means that when you're onboarding extra users, new users, it's a lot easier to do it consistently. And this is one of the points. Some of these solutions are quite cheap, they're easy to install, and it also means that down the line, it's going to be much easier to onboard. When you've got to a stage where you're tens of users, hundreds of users, you don't really want to be spending hours manually setting computers up. Why it is difficult for IT support companies to work with Frankentech. Thank you, Rick. So an IT company or an internal IT department trying to deal with Frankentech is very difficult. First of all, because they may not be aware of everything that's being used. Secondly, because it hasn't been designed from the beginning to all work together. You're going to have issues of incompatibility. You're going to have lots of training issues. And in terms of an IT department, if you've got, say, 27 solutions when you could have been fine with 5, it means the IT department or that external IT provider is going to have to be knowledgeable on all those different solutions rather than a few. Aitchison, have been there with customers, know the situation. Thank you, yes. Shadow IT. Shadeen's asking, could you give me an example of shadow IT? So for example, let's say you want to keep track of notes relating to a customer. There is no CRM system. It may be the case that you decide to, you've been using something like Evernote. You decide to store all your notes about a client or your meetings in Evernote. That's something that IT doesn't know about at all. If that account got compromised, IT wouldn't have any idea about that at all. Or it may be the case that the company is using Zoom, but you decide that you prefer something else. You're using Google Meet or BlueJeans or something else. Those are examples of shadow IT. Or maybe even you've got Microsoft 365, but for some reason you're using iCloud to do your calendaring or sharing your calendars with clients, for example. So too early. As I said, it's very expensive. You're going to be putting in place something you really don't need at that stage. And you may ask, well, why does shadow IT creep in at this stage? Well, the point is that if something is too complex, too cumbersome, too complicated to run, people are going to likely look for a simpler solution. And once you've realized that it's too much and it's too hard to maintain or too costly, what's going to happen is you're going to have to implement something that's more appropriate for your needs, and that's what the second bar graph is. It's then moving from something that's too complex to something that's appropriate. So how do you avoid these mistakes? How do you avoid these scenarios? Here we go. Yes, Vaughn's saying, and quite hard to configure for a non-technical person. However, paying for external support company or project is quite outside the budget of a small startup. Yes, so one of the issues that that small companies consider is that they can't afford external support. They can't afford to pay for a large project. The thing is, there are providers who are suitable for all manner of companies. And again, I mean, when I first started, I was doing home support for home users, paying, charging by the hour. It wasn't very expensive. But my point with this is, if you're a small company, you may need to invest maybe in a small project. It might be a day's worth of fee. But if those systems are set up properly and appropriately, there's no need to be investing in projects and other services and tools all the time. Case in point, we have a client, they have a shared mailbox for all their finance questions that come in for the finance department. Recently, we scoped up what their requirements were. There are 5 people that need to use this, and we've come up with a solution that in fact will not cost anything. There's a free tier that's up to 10 users. And what this is going to do is it's going to completely change the way that the finance team handle queries that are coming in. It's going to be a very small project and no ongoing costs to begin with anyway. Once the team gets bigger, that will change. But one of the things is you don't need to spend a lot of money to get the right solutions in place. And if I just briefly go to this point before, is that when you're small, it's not appropriate to be spending a lot of money. It's completely appropriate to be spending to your means. So these solutions don't have to cost hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of pounds. Vicky says, we're in a Franken-Tech situation, great phrase, but as we go into a recession, how can I convince my board that a more managed outsourced solution and hence the investment is needed and justifiable? Good question. I would say I'll come back to that, but let me think on my feet. There are certain costs which are really important, and the point is to show the value of having, or the cost of having an inappropriate solution. And this usually plays out in terms of productivity and also morale. If people are using systems that are very difficult to use or they're unproductive, even saving, I mean, if you're a company of 50 and you're saving 10 minutes a day across all your staff, that's 500 minutes a day. And if you extrapolate that over a month and look at the hourly charge-out rate or the cost of each of those employees, you'll soon find that there'll be a quick ROI. So it's really important to look on the return on that investment to see whether it's worthwhile. And it definitely is, as long as you're choosing the right problems to solve and you're choosing the appropriate solutions. So as I said, so the first thing really, it comes back to the business itself. Where is the business now and what are its needs at the moment? And the next thing is to consider where the business is growing and what the needs are going to be in the future. Because as I've showed in the previous charts, what you don't want to do is put a solution in place now that is going to be out of date in 6 months' time and have to be replaced again. And if you've got your IT solutions aligned with your business needs, then what happens is rather than it being an overhead, again, this goes back to your point, Vicky, it becomes an investment because what it's doing is it's actually providing value to the business directly because it's actually answering its needs. And so if you consider it that way, the way to ensure that you continue to be developing IT in the appropriate way is to have a strategy. Aitchison said, in the past, some companies used to view IT as a cost, not an investment. This has now changed and more investment is going into the IT strategy. Absolutely. I mean, one thing to consider is that you're going to be spending money on IT anyway. You do already have systems, whether it's Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace for email and file sharing. So there is already a cost. And again, another thing is that these platforms, they have a lot of built-in features that a lot of people are not aware of. So it's not the case that you actually have to invest in lots of different solutions because both of those systems have lots of features in terms of device management, in terms of video conferencing, instant messaging, for example, Teams. So the first step, where is your business now? And again, smaller companies, startups will have less structure, and that's completely understandable and that's completely normal. So you have to work to the size of your business. But you need to map out, in any case, what the roles and responsibilities are, who's doing what, how you do your work. And in terms of processes and procedures, it's ideal if you can start writing that down even early on in the business. It has a lot of benefits. It's often the case that we see that when companies are small, they're more unstructured, they don't have standard operating procedures or processes written down. The onboarding process, the induction process often involves a lot of talking, a lot of explaining verbally how things are done, which opens up to different people having different ideas of how things work. But when you're looking to put solutions in place, it's important to have a single way of things being done, because it's very difficult to then build systems around processes where they're done in different ways by different people. If everyone's got a different take, it's going to be very difficult to put a system in place to capture the way that you work. So, especially if you're larger, it's then important to set up interviews, talk to different people in different roles. And you can also do this by sending out surveys. And it's also important, especially if you've now got a large enough organisation where you've got disparate departments, to have them all involved and put a bit of more of a formal process in place to capture all this information. The other thing as well is that there's a large element of change management involved, organisational change. And so when you are putting systems in place, even though the system might solve all your problems, might be an ideal solution, if you haven't considered the people element of it, then you're likely to have a rather less than fully successful implementation. Anton asks, how do you measure ROI from your company's IT expenditure? Again, the first part of this, as I mentioned before, is to realize the cost of not having the IT solution in place. If you don't do that first, then it's much more likely that the investment is just going to look like a cost. So it's important to, in advance, measure the cost at the moment, then put in place the metrics to be able to measure your strategy going forward, which I'll cover on another slide as well. So, as I said, you're already spending money on IT, and the way that you transform this spend into an investment is to make sure that you're getting a return. And the way to get a return is to make sure you understand your business now, what it needs, what it's going to need as you grow, to make sure that whatever you're putting in place is not going to have to be replaced or re-implemented. And as I said, when IT is adding value to the business, it's an investment because it's providing a return. But how do you develop an IT strategy? So you need to consider your current and future needs. And depending on how you run your business, you may be familiar with OKRs, objectives and key results. You may have sales plans, growth plans. These are all relevant to this. What's important, once you understand what your business needs, it's then important to define the scope of what you're going to be solving and the timeline you're going to be doing that against. In some of these situations, again, I gave the example of managing a finance inbox. That's something that can be scoped in a matter of hours and maybe sometimes even implemented in a matter of days. And sometimes it's useful to consider doing a proof of concept and then looking at working towards a minimum viable product, and maybe either on a test group or then on one department before you then spread that out to the rest of the business. But you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. It may well be the case, even with your Frankentech setup, that there's systems of value already in place. It's not a case of having to throw everything away and starting again. And often, especially with fast-growing companies who need high-velocity IT, you can't afford that downtime. So it's a case of changing the wheels while the car's driving. Once you've done this and you've looked at what your needs are, you've looked at the scope of the projects and the timeline you're considering, and then also what you've already got in place, you can then put together an IT roadmap which is going to be your map of development over the course of the next 6 months, next year, the next 2 years. Again, businesses vary in the way that they work, vary in terms of the environment they work within, and so each one is going to be different. And so for some people it is completely relevant and appropriate to be looking at 5 years, whereas in other cases 6 months or 3 months may even be right, especially as you're starting out. You don't want to overinvest and build a system that you're going to have to then change from. And as Anton, I believe, was asking earlier on, it's really important to then define KPIs to be able to measure the performance of the strategy to make sure that it's working for your business and adding that value and being an investment. And as things change and as the business grows, and also the success or lack of success of any solutions or projects you put in place, it's important to review and adapt your strategy as your business changes, the environment changes as well. Matthew, what's the tipping point between doing your IT support planning, etc., in-house versus utilising an outsourced resource? Well, that's very kind of you to ask, because this is what we are. We're an outsourced resource. It depends. I mean, some companies start with outsourced and they move in-sourced, and another way around. Some of the companies that we work with, especially scale-ups and startups that are very focused on high growth and what they do best, they're very keen to outsource everything else. They can just focus on their core capability. If you're considering hiring someone, it's often better value to have someone have it outsourced, because you're then working with a team of people rather than one. You don't have to worry about recruitment, staff retention, career progression. And we find that companies that do have internal resources that stay for a while, there's usually at least 3 people required, a senior and 2 juniors, someone to manage the other ones as well. So there's a bit of a jump to build your own internal IT resource. The way this sometimes works is, again, when companies are being founded, it's usually that someone is quite IT literate. Sometimes a little knowledge is dangerous, but they will be able to carry the company to a certain extent. But it's a choice. You can either outsource or you can hire. There are pros and cons to each. But especially with a company like ours, where there's a lot of different experience, it's going to be hard to hire that with a few people. And also when someone is working internally, you have to think about their motivations and why they would want to stay, and how you keep them interested and how you keep developing them. And you may get to a point where what's required by the business doesn't justify any further development in the internal IT resource. So there are pros and cons. Aitchison asks, on the whole, IT companies should offer a service over and above the initial implementation and go live that enables the customers to get the best out of their investment. A service that can measure the ROI over a given time that aligns with the strategy. Yes, it's not just about putting a solution in place. And again, just for lack of time, I've simplified things, but these IT solutions first have to be scoped, planned, implemented, tested, rolled out. People have to be trained. And then these services have to be managed and developed. So it's very important that you consider that when you are putting these solutions in place, you're also thinking about how they're going to be maintained and how they're going to be developed, and also to make sure that they continue to provide value as well. Okay, so, and then finally, what's it look like when you have considered the business needs and then you've aligned the solutions? The benefits there are great, because what this means is that there's less risk of people going off and using their own solutions, whether they pay for them themselves or whether they find a service that's free, because, as you can see on the graph on the right, the solution exceeds enough and has enough room to grow for the business needs as well. Because everything is connected and there's full visibility from IT and it's been planned correctly, it's a lot easier to manage. And because of that as well, and security is much more of an issue than it was before, especially because everything is connected via the cloud, and there are more people interested in trying to attack And for example, the Ukraine war has increased cyber attacks. It's really important these days that companies consider their security. I've got another question from Vaughan. Vicky, you are from a startup. What's an actual roadmap? Almost sounds like a buzzword for us to pay more money. Okay, well, so a roadmap. What is a roadmap? Is just a plan. So where are we now? What do we need? Where are we going? What are we going to need then? It might be as simple as saying, well, at the moment we have 10 people. In a year's time, we're going to have 100. What problems are we going to be facing along the way? How are we going to have to change the way that we operate so that at that point in time we're still functioning and we're not now suffering from growing pains? Yes, I mean it is a buzzword. I mean it's a useful word because everyone understands what it is. A roadmap. You call it a plan. You can call it whatever you want, but it's important that you don't just put something in place for the present pain, but consider what you're going to need to have in the future. So it's just planning ahead, making sure that your solutions are fit for purpose, not just now, but also at least in the next year or two, so you don't have to keep replacing stuff. Roman mentioned IT roadmap, so I'm interested. Good. Yes, so the other benefits, it's much easier to onboard employees when you've got the systems in place, as someone mentioned about MDM, mobile device management, because then it's easier to set those machines up. If you, for example, have something like identity management, then it's very easy to then set up accounts for people and then also remove them when you need to. So you may have heard of products such as Okta or Jump Cloud or Azure AD. Those are all solutions for those kind of problems. And then also your systems are more connected. It's much more important now than ever, the value of data and being able to get the information that you need at the right time to make the right decisions or to be able to provide the services within your particular business. And because of that, your employees are then, and your staff are going to be much more productive, and they're also going to be happier doing their jobs as well because they've got the right tools for the job rather than having to muddle through with Frankentech. And again, another benefit of that is that it's going to cost less to keep it running. So the total cost of ownership value is going to be lower. Cool. And again, if you've got the right system in place now, if you've planned in advance, if you're thinking about growth, whether it's expanding on a current solution, going to a higher tier, for example, if you're using Salesforce as a CRM, the risk of getting the next project wrong are going to be lower. The gap between where you are at the moment and the capabilities you need are going to be smaller, and therefore it's going to cost less to put in place what you need. So, as I said, just to recap, so without a plan, your IT is going to be either too little, too early, or too late. And in all those situations, you're going to spend money incorrectly, and it's not going to be aligned with your business. And it's also not going to be supporting the growth of your business. It's important to align the spend of your IT with the needs of your business, because then you're spending your money wisely. And it also means that it's going to support your growth. And this is most important when you're a scale-up or you're a fast growth company. And then finally, it's really important to make sure that you keep your strategy current. You don't want to just put an IT solution in place and think that that's going to solve your problems forever. Sheldon asks, does MDM help with GDPR? So GDPR is about ensuring that you have proper data governance around personal data. MDM, does it directly? I mean, MDM is related to device management. It's not so related to data protection. Apart from, oh yeah, very good. Yes, so for example, one of the things that device management can be used for is to ensure that encryption is enabled on a computer. So for example, if you've got a team of salespeople who have laptops, by implementing MDM, you can ensure, you can know A, that all the devices are encrypted, and then B, another benefit of MDM is that you can either lock or you can remotely wipe those devices. Okay, so I've been through the presentation. I hope that you found some of it useful. The idea is that there is something in there that will have given you food for thought. So any questions? Any more questions? There have been quite a few questions, but yeah. Jenny and Jeanette, have you got any questions coming in?
Coming through now, Roman.
Okay. So we had a question. Have you seen any examples of underinvesting or overinvesting with clients, and how did this get solved? Well, I'd like to say that we never make mistakes, but we have ourselves made a mistake, and we overinvested in so we're an IT support company, so we put in an IT support solution that had lots and lots of bells and whistles and was very exciting. The license fees were probably about 4 times as much as what we'd paid before. But because it was a complex system, we then had to pay for a partner to implement it as well. The implementation didn't go well, so we then had another partner do another implementation. And then because the system was now so complex, we had to then hire someone to maintain the system on an ongoing basis, which was actually more than the cost of the system itself. So after about a year, we realized that this was the wrong direction. We tried various ways of fixing the system, and in fact what we did is we then scaled back to something that was simpler and actually covers all the needs we have. So this was very much a situation of too early. It may well be the case that this system is appropriate for us in the future, but we realize, and I think that's one of the things, is like if you do realize you're in a situation where even if you spent a lot of money, that cost is now sunk, and it's really about looking about what the business needs now and cutting losses and making sure if you make a mistake, that you correct that and you put something appropriate in place. Are there any quick fixes when it comes to IT? Blimey, that is a that is a broad question. Quick fixes. Well, I guess if you're talking about, if you're in a situation where it is a bit of a mess, one of the first things is to try and bring a bit of order to it. And again, if I look back at one of the previous slides, which I'm talking about, it's how do you put an IT strategy together? It doesn't have to take weeks. It doesn't have to be an onerous, massive project, but it's 2 things. One is, what do you need and what do you have? And it's looking about and just combining those 2 and seeing if there's anything in there that's superfluous and anything in there that's not really working. And then also if you do, especially if you're a smaller company, it's a lot easier to do, is to find out why people might be using certain products, which ones are working better, and then starting to slim down your setup so to make it more congruous. I've got another question. What should a company do that can't afford IT support yet because they're very small but still need to plan for the future because they know they're onto something and know they will grow? So, I mean, the assumption then is that the very small company is not funded, it doesn't have any backing, it's not got any seed funding, maybe people are doing this themselves for the first time. They may have worked in a business and thought they can set out on their own. Again, I mean, you can talk to a different IT provider. A lot of IT providers will be quite happy to have an initial conversation without charging any money at all, and that goes for us. If we have any companies approaching us, we'll always have an initial chat to understand what their needs are. And even if we can't help, and even if they can't afford us, we can definitely point them in the right direction. So that's the first thing, is like, don't be afraid to approach IT providers and ask for some advice. And again, the other thing as well is that these projects don't need to cost a lot of money. And again, it is an investment, because if you can set yourself up in the right direction from the beginning, it's going to be a lot less costly down the road because of the way that people will be able to work much better, and because you won't have to have much larger implementation down the line. A case in point, we had a small startup approach us. They had 4 people. Actually, they had 2 people, and they were just about to hire 2 more. And they had already set themselves up on Google Workspace. But the person I was talking to was saying that they were really keen on Microsoft, and they really liked OneDrive. Now, they weren't that technically literate, But in that conversation, we could say, well, it doesn't really make sense for you to be on Google. You can cancel that. You've only got one account. This is how you migrate the data. So it's never, and this is my whole point, is that it's never too early to think about IT, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And this is one of the things that people are sometimes concerned about, is that investing in IT necessarily has to mean spending lots of money. It doesn't. And in some cases, it's very, very inexpensive. Can Macs and PCs coexist? Do you support both? Yes, we do. We're focused on Mac. We work with companies that are predominantly Mac-based, and inevitably there'll be a few PCs around, and we see about half and half use Google or Microsoft, so we need to know that anyway. And they definitely can. And these days, a lot more applications work on both platforms, and a lot more of the services that clients will be using are actually cloud-based anyway. So it's a lot easier now, and they can definitely coexist. What are your IT must-haves for fast-growing companies? Michael, thank you. That's a good question. So the first thing I would say is you need to have some kind of Office suite to do your email, your file sharing, your instant messaging, your video conferencing, and obviously because of the pandemic now we're working more remotely than we used to. We're much more interested in sitting in front of a video camera. The second thing is having some kind of device management. It's really, again, with a disparate workforce or even without one, if you're hiring people and you need to set things up, it's just a lot easier to have device management. It means that rather than sitting down at a computer, downloading installers, installing and running updates, that can all happen very easily. It's very inexpensive to start with, and it'll save you a lot of time. Then having some kind of instant messaging. So if you're in Office, then you can use Teams. A lot of people use Slack. And again, I was talking about processes and procedures, having some kind of knowledge base, somewhere where you talk about how the business runs to help with induction. Lots of different products. You could use SharePoint, you could use Google Drive. A lot of startups these days are using products like Notion. We ourselves use something called Kipwise. And then security is very important. Having some kind of security training. It's a requirement of GDPR to train your staff at least once a year. Accounting package. I mean, I don't think people very often still create their invoices in Word, but it does happen. So something like Xero or QuickBooks. Antivirus, even on a Mac. And if you're doing Cyber Essentials, it's a requirement as well. So having some kind of decent antivirus, whether it's from CrowdStrike or Sophos or WebRoot and the like. Any top tips for startup apps and tools to get some structure in place? I think I've covered most of that. I'm just wondering, of course, there's another thing that's really important, having some kind of HR platform. There are lots of different ones. There's Humans, Charlie HR, Bamboo HR. This will help a lot. It'll help a lot in terms of tracking your holiday allowance, sickness, salaries when those change in job roles, helping with onboarding. And if you have the right system in place, it can really give a really good first impression as well and take a lot of the admin off your plate too. Rick asks, iOS or Android smiley face, tongue sticking out? Thank you. Well, obviously I would say iOS. I think I used an Android phone once. The reason I would say iOS, especially if you're in a company where people are using their own phones, it's going to be more secure. There is only one app store, which is Apple's App Store. On an Android device, you can use any app store. It's a lot easier to get malware on those devices. However, for example, if you've got Google Workspace, you can manage those Android devices as well and lock them down to the Google Play Store. And then the alternate answer is they're both fine. We focus on Apple, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with non-iPhone devices. Right. Any other questions coming in? I think that might be it. Anything about anything we've talked about today? Aitchison, you said, really interested particularly about fixing a system mistake. Sometimes ongoing implementation costs, I think that says far outweighs the initial investment. Yeah. And that's true. I mean, I think a rule of thumb is if you are investing in anything that you can't afford, it's probably not right for you. Whether that be a product or, or anything else, it's, you don't want to take on an office that's too big for you and have that rent, locked in. So yeah, it's really important to pick the right things. And that's a good rule of thumb is if you're looking at a system and it seems to be eye-wateringly expensive, you probably need to go and look at something else. Vaughan says, antivirus on a Mac. Apple Store makes it sound like it's not necessarily Mac susceptible to viruses. Well, even if they're not, if you're going for Cyber Essentials, and I don't know if you don't know what that is, it's a certification that's been put together by the National Cyber Security Centre, which is part of GCHQ. And GCHQ wants to make the whole of the UK as secure as possible. And one of the ways to do that is make businesses as secure as possible. And Cyber Essentials is essentially good advice, which protects you against about 97% of any cyber attacks out there. So you can't get certified if you don't have antivirus protection on a Mac, if you have Macs in your business. But secondly, yes, they are susceptible, and there's a database online that you can look at, the CV database, which will show you all the exploits that are relevant to Mac. And if you're running products such as SecPod, Saner Now, it's a vulnerability scanning tool. You can see all the vulnerabilities that you're susceptible to. So all software has vulnerabilities. Anyone can take advantage of those if they're known. And also people are writing malware and viruses for Mac. And as the Mac platform becomes more popular and is used more in businesses, there's more reason for people to develop malware for that platform as well. Paul, great session, Roman, thank you. Is there a common error that crops up more often, time and time again, for fast-growing companies? I think it's mostly around the other applications that are not the core ones. So people quite often will have an Office suite in place. I mean, they're not going to really be able to operate without one. But it's then looking at applications specific to certain parts of the operation of the business. And this is where we often see spreadsheets. One start to move away from that is rather considering a spreadsheet as a kind of proof of concept. This is kind of a way of gathering our needs and how we would like to work things. You can then either look at that scope and then find a solution straight away, or you can then develop that proof of concept more. Internally, what we sometimes do is we use a tool called Airtable, which is a database which allows us to build business applications. And if it gets more complex, then we can then look at a pre-built solution. So that's really the thing, is it's about looking at the workflows, how different departments work together, or how a particular service runs from beginning to end, the journey for the customer, for example, and making sure as much as possible that those different steps are joined up. And one of the focuses, or one of the themes, I think, for this decade in terms of IT is going to be automation and machine learning, about looking at those mundane or simple or repetitive tasks that can be removed from people's own plates by using automation. This will free up their time, they can work on higher value work, and it will reduce the errors that come in as well. Vaughan asks, where can I find information on Cyber Essentials? Is it a requirement? If you go to iasme.co.uk, that's iasme.co.uk, they have a page on Cyber Essentials. You can also download a guide which will give you all the questions that you would need to answer as well. And on that note as well, there's Cyber Essentials Plus. The difference is Cyber Essentials is self-certified, so you fill out the questionnaire yourself. Cyber Essentials Plus, they will then check to make sure that what you say you are doing, you are actually doing as well. But it's simple things like keeping your computer up to date within 2 weeks of a release coming out, making sure that no one's using admin accounts, making sure that you have two-factor authentication where possible, you're changing default passwords on network infrastructure and hardware, and also that you have some rudimentary processes in place at least to be able to decide whether someone should or should not have admin access to certain systems as well. If they've made a mistake with IT, can an IT provider help, or will they rip everything out and start again? Cost is an issue. Yeah, again, I mean, internally, if you're looking at what you have in place, that's very easy for you to then decide what you want to keep or not. If you are at the point where you need external support and you're having someone come in to look at things, it will go in one of two ways. Some IT companies will try and work with whatever's in place. So, for example, if your networking kit is Meraki, but the company that you're talking to don't do Meraki, but they're working on a Ubiquity instead, they may, if they want to work with you, say, well, actually, we're going to have to put Ubiquity kit in from now on. We will, understanding that there's a large investment, we will try as much as possible to work with whatever's in place. But that's a call on the IT provider, because it obviously is more difficult if you're supporting something that you don't normally. Engineers will need to be trained to be able to handle that kind of stuff. But it depends on the provider. It depends on exactly what bit of kit. But I would say if you've put a large investment in something and that works, then you want to ideally find a provider that's going to be able to support what you have in place. Matt, what's the value of being an ACN? So we're Apple focused. We're part of something called the Apple Consultants Network. So Apple, for companies of 500 and below at least, their enterprise support teams aren't designed to cater for that size company. So quite often what happens is if businesses are Apple based and they're coming to an Apple store and they talk to the business team, they only know about Apple. They don't know about other stuff, so they wouldn't be able to help with internet connections or security questions or implementing a CRM or whatever else. So the Apple Consultants Network is a group of certified, insured, third-party companies that have been vetted by Apple, so that Apple, when there are companies of 500 and below, can then pass on those queries and have those companies be supported. Can Microsoft Office 365 work well on a Mac? Yes, mostly. I mean, it is a slightly poor second cousin. We've seen situations where there are complex Excel spreadsheets where a Mac will just grind to a halt, where a PC will just fly through it. And that's just more down to the implementation as opposed to any issues with the Mac platform itself. We have also seen issues with OneDrive, so syncing files between the OneDrive agent on the Mac and the cloud to a SharePoint document library. That can cause problems. There are other solutions such as Ignite, which is a fantastic file sharing platform, which Microsoft has partnered with, that works really well on a Mac. But on the whole, I mean, file sharing can be a bit of an issue, but apart from that, it works really well. And again, if you're in finance and you're doing some really heavy number crunching, it can be a bit tricky, but on the whole, yes, it works really well. And it's in Microsoft's interest as well to make sure that it works, and any issues that they do have on OneDrive, they're working on. And again, you'll see if you do use it, how, for example, the Outlook client continues to be strongly developed. I don't know if there are any other questions. If there are, just let us know. If not, you can email me. You can see, that's my email address, roman@drlogic.com, or you can DM me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Vicky, the webinar talks about the biggest mistakes, but what is the biggest IT success a company can do? And that's really, it's a mentality, and I think it's about realizing that in this day and age, if you're not really looking at how IT is going to give you value, you're missing a trick, because there are going to be other companies that are. So it's about realizing that IT can and needs to support the business, and when they're aligned, then things work really well. Great, I think that might be it. I think we've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone's got any other questions, you can pop them in. Otherwise, we might end it here. I think that's it. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. I hope you got something out of it. But the key thing is just make sure that your IT matches your business where it is now. And you can easily do that by looking at what your business needs and then making sure that your IT is providing what it needs. And then you're good. Thank you very much.